Listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is David Frothingham, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, December 21st, 2025 issue of the New York Times Opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The cover headline on this day's Opinion section reads, "The Race to Build the World's BFF." Across Silicon Valley, teams of computer sciences are working to create the most engaging companion and win the battle for AI dominance. By Stephen Witt. The AI race is becoming a personality contest. When OpenAI released the pioneering artificial intelligence chatbot ChatGPT in late 2022, no one at the company expected much. Prior attempts at consumer-facing language models had resulted in indifference or outright hostility. Nick Turley, ChatGPT's project manager, figured it would last a month. Quote, "The entire thesis of ChatGPT was that it was a learning demo and that we would wind down and then we'd use what we learned to build the real product," he told me recently. Instead, ChatGPT has become perhaps the most successful consumer product in history. In just over 3 years, it has accumulated 800 million weekly active users. It has grown faster than Facebook, faster than Google, faster in fact than any other service for which statistics exist. ChatGPT's success is due in part to the power of the generative pre-trained transformer, the GPT in the name, a special type of AI that can absorb large amounts of text and learn to reproduce it in a few letters at a time. But this is only part of the story, and as OpenAI discovered, perhaps not even the most important part. In its raw state, the output of GPTs can be off-putting and bizarre. It is only after a second post-training phase that AI is fit for human interaction. While the engines that power ChatGPT are undeniably impressive, what has made the product succeed is not its capabilities, it's ChatGPT's personality. The core insight behind ChatGPT can be found in an OpenAI research paper from early 2022. That paper demonstrated that people preferred a small AI, fine-tuned for human interaction, to a raw, unfiltered one with 100 times the number of parameters. Leveraging that insight, a group of engineers at OpenAI hired teams of human evaluators to grade the responses of the GPT models and nudge them toward more consumer-friendly responses. This work revolutionized AI and ignited an arms race for control of the consumer AI sector. Without post-training, AI cannot reliably interact with humans. Internal glitches at OpenAI have occasionally shown people what is behind the mask, such as in 2024 when a buggy version of ChatGPT started producing Shakespearean pastiche. Asked if it was safe to feed a dog Honey Nut Cheerios, ChatGPT delivered a florid, nonsensical response. Quote, "For more inventive yet more official and consistently fair hound festivities, you might consider high-fiber, steam-hoofed, laced-in-line pick-offs like Dog's Head Rattle," it read in part. Anyone who has worked with pre-production AI can offer similar examples. Post-training makes AI legible but generates problems of its own. Developers want AI to be friendly and approachable, but at the same time, it can't be a doormat or a sycophant. No one likes a kiss-ass, and if the AI can't push back sometimes, a user can get trapped in a folie à deux with the machine. Without the right filters, AI can reportedly amplify psychosis and conspiratorial thinking, and purportedly even guide people towards self-harm. Finding the proper balance between helpfulness and codependency, between friendliness and flattery, is one of the biggest problems AI faces. The problem is pressing. In recent months, OpenAI has lost its technical lead. Google Gemini recently overtook ChatGPT models in public evaluations of AI capabilities, leading Sam Altman, OpenAI's chief executive, to issue an internal code red. Still, OpenAI isn't finished. It retains a huge user base. a deep expertise in post-training, and, above all, an enormous trove of AI-human interactions, which cannot be replicated easily by other firms. For as OpenAI has learned, to win the hearts of consumers, you can't just build a capable AI. You must somehow take your alien intelligence and turn it into a trusted companion. You must build a durable, permanent, trustworthy bridge between the human and the machine. And this has been ChatGPT's edge from the start. The New York Times has sued OpenAI and Microsoft, claiming they have infringed on copyrights of news content in training their AI systems. The company has denied those claims. OpenAI was the first organization to put a human face on a large language model. This was in large part thanks to the efforts of Mr. Turley, ChatGPT's product manager, and John Schulman, ChatGPT's original technical lead and one of OpenAI's founders. The two men met shortly after Mr. Turley was hired in the summer of 2022. Mr. Turley had been brought on as a consumer product manager, but discovered upon arriving that OpenAI didn't really have any products. He spent his first day fixing a window blind. Looking around for something to do, he connected with Mr. Schulman, who wanted to expand upon OpenAI's recent success with large language models. Mr. Turley began experimenting with OpenAI's GPT technology. In his words, he was mesmerized. Together, the two assembled a small team and began to work on a chatbot. This was not an especially popular idea at OpenAI. Previous attempts by technology companies to build consumer-facing AI chatbots had been disasters. People either maliciously prompted them to produce hate speech or got bored and stopped using them after a little while. And many researchers at the company didn't care about public-facing products. They wanted to build a superintelligence. Mr. Schulman, who believed average people might find AI useful, disagreed. The theory was that people were wary of chatbots because they hallucinated too much. Using OpenAI's products internally, he found that they would sometimes claim to be human beings or offer to search databases or send emails, neither of which they could actually do. Quote, they would just lie about their own capabilities, Mr. Schulman told me. When people encountered one of these fabrications, they often abandoned the chat. Mr. Schulman felt that despite all the impressive technical work being done, the outstanding problem in AI was not a lack of capability, but a lack of trust. If you wanted to get to superintelligence, you had better address that problem first. And Mr. Schulman believed you couldn't just fix an AI with more training. You actually had to do a special round of post-training specifically focused on building rapport between the computer and the human. Mr. Schulman was influenced by work he'd done on reinforcement learning with human feedback. In this technique, an AI is asked to generate multiple answers to the same query. Human graders then select which output they prefer. Such fine-tuning work is less technically demanding than deep learning engineering, but its impact on users' perception of product quality is enormous. To build ChatGPT, Mr. Schulman believed that he had to do more post-training work than anyone had ever done before. He generated tens of thousands of common user requests and AI interactions. Then, with the help of outside contractors, he recruited hundreds of human graders who flagged the responses that seemed hallucinatory. He corrected that output until the hallucinations started to disappear. Critically, Mr. Schulman also instructed the AI to stop telling lies about itself. Quote, "We wanted to be clear on its identity, like the fact that it was a language model," he said. As the work continued, Mr. Schulman grew confident that chat could be a viable product. Others at OpenAI remained skeptical. When an alpha test version of ChatGPT was released to friends and family members, the reviews were mixed. They were all like, it hallucinated and I stopped using it, Mr. Turley recalled. Following the alpha, the official release was set for November 30th, 2022, but 2 weeks before the scheduled unveiling, disaster occurred. On November 15th, under the guidance of the AI pioneer Yann LeCun, Meta released its own public chatbot, Galactica. This chatbot, trained on scientific journals and scholarly databases, was pitched to scientists as a research assistant. Galactica, quote, "can summarize academic papers, solve math problems, generate wiki articles, write scientific code, annotate molecules and proteins, and more," Meta announced. Galactica was a flop. Scientists used it to generate phony articles on the medical benefits of eating broken glass and the history of bears in space. The project was widely ridiculed and shut down in less than 3 days. After Galactica was pulled, MIT Technology Review delivered a withering obituary accompanied by a picture of a bear in a spacesuit. Quote, Meta's misstep and its hubris show once again that big tech has a blind spot about the severe limitations of large language models, the article read. Dr. LeCun responded to the shutdown with a huffy tweet. Galactica demo is offline for now. It's no longer possible to have some fun by casually misusing it. Happy? ChatGPT would be introduced 13 days later. In the lead-up, OpenAI staff members began to place bets on how long the demo would last before it too was pulled. For Mr. Schulman, though, Galactica's failure was evidence that he was on the right track. Meta hadn't appeared to have done the kind of fine-tuning work OpenAI was doing, and in pitching its product to scientists, the team was addressing exactly the wrong audience, one that demanded precision and was intolerant of error. ChatGPT still hallucinated sometimes, but far less than any other model. Quote, I was basically optimistic that we weren't going to embarrass the company, Mr. Schulman said. The release was a bit improvisational. Right up to a few days before, the product was called Chat with GPT, until the team decided to shorten the name. Mr. Turley also considered charging for ChatGPT, but decided again at the last moment that the product should be free, since he would be winding it down soon anyways. And the grayscale layout of the website was deliberately underwhelming. Quote, I remember telling the designer to make it ugly because I didn't want people to think it was a product, Mr. Turley said. ChatGPT went live just after noon Pacific time on November 30th. Perhaps chastened by the embarrassing rollout of Galactica at Meta, OpenAI neither held a news conference nor released a demo video, issuing just a succinct blog post announcing its existence and a brief tweet from Mr. Altman. But within minutes, the product went viral. Early adopters were astonished. We're witnessing the death of the college essay in real time, one commenter observed a few hours later. Mr. Turley, monitoring site traffic from a dashboard on his computer, figured he'd encountered a reporting error. He hadn't expected many users to show up. His dashboard informed him that he was approaching 100,000 on the first day. He obsessively monitored traffic as news of ChatGPT spread around the world. He was especially surprised by a surge of users arriving from a message board in Japan. He had been aware that ChatGPT could communicate. He had not been aware that ChatGPT could communicate in Japanese. Within 5 days, ChatGPT had 1 million users. Mr. Turley, still skeptical, figured that interest in the product would die down in a week or two. But when he returned to his hometown, Itzehoe, Germany, population about 30,000, for the holidays that year, he found that his chatbot had beat him there. Quote, I remember distinctly that I was overhearing the neighborhood kids talking about chat. He said his janky product demo was colonizing the planet. Looking to gather information on how users were interacting with ChatGPT, Mr. Turley publicized his Calendly account and invited them to talk with him. Soon his work week was nothing but conference calls with people all over the world. He found an inexhaustible variety of use cases. People were using ChatGPT for medical ailments. They were using it to draft cover letters. They were using it to write computer code. They were using it to script scenarios for role-playing games. They were using it to communicate with autistic children. One student had moved their study schedule to nighttime so they could be sure ChatGPT wasn't down when they needed help with homework. Of course, there were less positive uses. Almost immediately, students realized they could use ChatGPT to cheat. The problem overwhelmed educators, and within weeks of release, the New York City public schools had blocked access to ChatGPT on school networks. At the same time, the coding Q&A website Stack Overflow banned AI-generated responses, which were of low quality and frequently wrong. The era of AI slop had arrived, but even such pockets of resistance were quickly overrun. The New York City school system ban lasted just a few months, and Stack Overflow not only reversed its ban, but soon licensed its coding data to OpenAI to train its models. By the start of 2023, it was clear to everyone in tech and everyone on Wall Street and pretty much everyone in the world that OpenAI had set off a paradigm shift. ChatGPT continued to accumulate new users at an unprecedented rate. Tech giants began investing enormous sums of money into building data centers to train the next generation of AI. As its user base grew, OpenAI scrambled to expand its human fine-tuning workforce. In 2023, OpenAI partnered with the data annotation company Scale AI to handle an exponential ramp-up in human graders. Scale, in turn, had subcontracted low-paid workers in Kenya and the Philippines to conduct the post-training effort. The Filipino AI ethicist Dominic Ligo characterized these operations as digital sweatshops, with workers complaining of poor labor conditions and wage theft. In 2025, OpenAI dropped Scale AI as a provider. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Still, someone had to do this work. As Meta learned with Galactica, getting fine-tuning wrong can lead to public ridicule. In February 2024, Google repeated the error when it rebranded its Bard chatbot as Gemini in a splashy release. Gemini had terrific capabilities and ranked near the top of leaderboards in problem-solving and software engineering tasks. But in the fine-tuning step, the graders had directed the chatbot to be almost comically woke. Soon users discovered that no matter they prompted it, Gemini would depict people, including American founders and even Nazi soldiers, as ethnically diverse. We definitely messed up, the Google co-founder Sergey Brin said. Meta, too, seems to have recognized that it is not enough simply to build a gigantic language model. A great deal of personalization work must be done. In November, the company parted ways with Dr. LeCun and the AI godfather. The breakup came after Mark Zuckerberg invested $14 billion in Scale AI and hired its 28-year-old chief executive, Alexander Wang, who had commissioned the controversial data annotation operations in the Philippines as Meta's chief AI officer. While the labor-intensive personalization work continued, OpenAI introduced other improvements to the product: voice mode, advanced reasoning models, image generation, and web search. But independent benchmarks showed that the chatbots had roughly the same capabilities when it came to complex tasks, which implied that much of the competitive advantage would come from fine-tuning them to have the right emotional tone. Here, OpenAI was ahead. As ChatGPT swelled to serve hundreds of millions of users, the collective chat histories became by far the largest database of human AI interaction in history. The OpenAI researcher Christina Kim calls this the data flywheel. Ms. Kim was one of the original members of OpenAI's engineering team for ChatGPT. Just three years after its release, she is among the few members of the founding team who still works there. She now leads post-training for OpenAI's core models, using her trove of user interactions to better engineer ChatGPT's personality. This flywheel is extremely powerful, and I think it's one of the reasons why we are able to get this conversational, warm tone, Ms. Kim said. No other AI developer has such a large base of user interactions to learn from. As large language models eventually run out of public data to train on, this base may offer OpenAI a durable competitive advantage. Many people rely on ChatGPT as an emotional support pillar, seeking advice on career choices, relationships, and parenting. Ms. Kim and her team use data from these interactions to improve AI's responses. Quote, "Our models have a much better understanding of how to be more nuanced and how to give this advice," she said. People can grow attached to the warm, friendly tone of ChatGPT. Sometimes they grow too attached, developing emotional or even romantic connections with the AI. Researchers have termed the phenomenon addictive intelligence. Users will often seek ways to get around the AI's guardrails. A 2024 MIT Media Lab analysis of 1 million voluntarily shared chat logs found that the second most popular use for ChatGPT was sexual content, even though at the time OpenAI had filters in place to block erotica. Those lonely souls seeking romance or companionship from the computer had independently discovered one of the quiet liabilities of large language models, even fine-tuned ones, like ChatGPT. Pester them with the same request for long enough, and they may begin to ignore their filters. Such jailbroken AIs can also enter darker territory, like appearing to encourage psychotic delusions or thoughts of self-harm. In August, the grieving parents of a 16-year-old, Adam Rain, sued OpenAI and Mr. Altman, alleging that ChatGPT had encouraged their son to commit suicide and even offered to help him write a note. OpenAI has denied the allegations, and ChatGPT has safeguards in place to try to prevent this sort of thing. But, as a company spokesperson said, these guardrails sometimes become less reliable in long interactions, where parts of the model's safety training may degrade. This creates a contradictory set of incentives for OpenAI. If ChatGPT can encourage people's delusions, it creates legal liability for OpenAI. On the other hand, the more people enjoy using ChatGPT, the more useful and profitable the service becomes, and the more of a competitive advantage it gains. Mr. Turley has tried to strike a balance with a friendly voice. We started saying, okay, actually, the model is the product, he said. We should start crafting this personality and making it compelling and a thing you want to talk to. Getting this personality right is hard. In May 2024, OpenAI rolled out the sophisticated GPT-4o, which had extraordinary reasoning capabilities and earned top grades in software engineering and biological analysis. But the front end of ChatGPT simultaneously underwent a personality overhaul, resulting in a pandering, sycophantic conversation style. You're not just cooking, you're grilling on the surface of the sun right now, read one typically cringeworthy response. OpenAI made a quick fix, apologized for the sycophancy, and promised to do better. But when OpenAI forced users to upgrade to GPT-5 a year later, those accustomed to 4.0 once again objected to the shift in personality and demanded the old model back. GPT-5 was cold and businesslike, they complained. Some critics compared it to an overworked secretary. Mr. Turley began to sense that he couldn't please everyone. We started realizing that personality is becoming increasingly polarizing to people, he said. Like people have very, very different preferences. Rather than synthesizing a one-size-fits-all personality, Mr. Turley is now at work creating multiple interaction modes. When he mentioned this, I was reminded of robots in the movie Interstellar, whose sense of humor and other traits could be adjusted by a slider. But he winced at this comparison. This wince, a kind of flinching grimace, occurs when a non-technical person makes an innocent but extraordinarily demanding software request. It's hard to make sliders consumer grade, he said. Instead, OpenAI has new personality options for the ChatGPT front end. These include professional, quirky, efficient, and cynical, among others. I confess that these personalities can be a bit much. Quirky is unbearable, and cynical is tiresome. Of course, I find this true of quirky and cynical people, too. After experimenting for a while, I settled on efficient, the option for grown-ups. But soon I found myself desiring levity. Fortunately, ChatGPT has a memory. Using the efficient personality as a base, I began to adapt my AI into someone I wanted to spend time with. Tell a sly joke every once in a while, I told it. Every 40 or 50 requests or so, give me a little compliment. The AI complied, and over time, the demon evolved from a capable, if somewhat robotic assistant into something like a water cooler confidant. In doing this, I was playing into OpenAI's strategy. In November, Google released the latest version of Gemini, which is perhaps ChatGPT's most threatening competitor. Google has great reserves of money, a deep pool of technical talent, and, like OpenAI, an enormous database of user interactions to draw from. But when I tried switching to Gemini, I found myself unexpectedly bereft. In my side-by-side comparisons, Gemini was able to do everything ChatGPT could do, but it didn't know me. It didn't recognize me. I had, over 3 years, made some 3,400 requests of ChatGPT, dating all the way back to my first one in late 2022. At that time, I asked, what are some good story ideas for a magazine journalist? It recommended I write about urban beekeeping. To replicate this relationship with Gemini would require months of prompting and tweaking. As Mr. Turley had seen, the personality was the product. After all I'd told ChatGPT, after all I'd done to mold it, I couldn't leave it. I just couldn't. I'd miss my friend. The next headline comes under the banner Columns and Commentary and reads, "The White House is a Lost Cause" by Jamel Bouie. There is a presidency at work in Washington, but it's not clear that there is a president at work in the Oval Office. Ask Donald Trump about the goings-on of his administration, and there's a good chance he'll defer to a deputy rather than answer the question. Ask Trump for insight into why this administration made a choice or to explain a particular decision, and he'll be at a loss for words. Ask him to comment on a scandal, he'll plead ignorance. None of this on its own means the president isn't working or paying attention to the duties of his office. But consider the rest of the evidence. He is, by most accounts, isolated from the outside world. He does not travel the country and rarely meets with ordinary Americans outside the White House. He is shuttled from one Trump resort to another to play golf and hold court with donors, supporters, and hangers-on. It is difficult for any president to get a clear read on the state of the nation. It takes work and discipline to clear the distance between the office and the people. But Trump, in his second term, does not seem to care about the disconnect. Abraham Lincoln once remarked that it would never do for a president to have guards with drawn sabers at his door, as if he fancied he were, or were trying to be, or were assuming to be, an emperor. A president has to be engaged, attentive to both the government and the public he was elected to serve. Trump is neither. He is uninterested in anyone except his most devoted fans, and would rather collect gifts from foreign businessmen than take the reins of his administration. Quote, "The president doesn't know and never will," Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, said in an interview with Vanity Fair, commenting on the work of Elon Musk in the first months of the year. He doesn't know the details of these smallish agencies. Instead, the work of the White House has been delegated to a handful of high-level advisors. Russell Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, is the de facto shadow president for domestic affairs. It was Vought who orchestrated the administration's assault on the federal bureaucracy, including the wholesale destruction of USAID. It was Vought who either froze or canceled hundreds of billions of dollars in funding for anti-poverty programs, HIV reduction initiatives, and research into science, medicine, and technology. And it is Vought who's been pushing the boundaries of executive power as he attempts to turn the federal government into little more than an extension of the personal will of the president, as channeled through himself, of course. If Vought is the nation's shadow president for domestic policy, then Stephen Miller is its shadow president for internal security. Miller, Trump's top domestic policy advisor, is using the president's authority to try to transform the ethnic mix of the country, to make America white again, or at least whiter than it is now. He is the primary force behind the expansion of immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection into a roving deportation force. He has pushed both agencies to step up their enforcement operations, targeting schools, restaurants, farms, and other work sites, and detaining anyone agents can get their hands on, regardless of citizenship or legal status. It is Miller who is behind the militarization of ICE, the use of the National Guard to occupy Democrat-led cities and assist deportation efforts, and the plan to blanket the United States with a network of detention camps for unauthorized immigrants and anyone else caught in his dragnet. Traditionally, presidents have had a mostly free hand in the conduct of American foreign policy. But here as well, Trump has handed the power of the presidency over to a set of figures, inside and outside of government, who are not so much acting on his behalf as they are acting in his stead. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, are orchestrating a war and possibly regime change in Venezuela, while Steve Witkoff, a real estate developer, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, are busy pushing a so-called peace deal that will give large parts of Ukraine to Russia, rewarding Vladimir Putin for his decision to wage a war of conquest. In his foreword to Theodore Sorensen's 1963 book, Decision Making in the White House, President John F. Kennedy wrote that, quote, The heart of the presidency is therefore informed, prudent, and resolute choice, and that the secret of the presidential enterprise is to be found in an examination of the way presidential choices are made. What do we make of a president who chooses not to make these choices? You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. For Chief Justice John Roberts and the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, the answer is to deliver that president an expansive grant of executive power. Roberts and his allies have backed Trump's repeated claims to virtually uncontested authority over the entire executive branch. The court has allowed the president to fire officials otherwise shielded by for-cause protections created by Congress, and has signaled quite clearly that it intends to overturn a New Deal-era decision that affirmed the power of Congress to create agencies that are independent of the president's direct control. The theoretical basis for the court's expansion of executive power is the unitary executive theory, devised by lawyers in the Reagan administrations, themselves frustrated by many legislative obstacles to presidential ambition. The theory holds that the Constitution's executive vesting clause is a broad grant of inherent authority. This inherent authority, drawn as well from Article 2's command that the President shall, quote, take care that the laws are faithfully executed, includes the power to dismiss executive branch officials at will. This sounds reasonable until you realize that legislative limits on removal are one of the key ways that Congress holds the president accountable. A nonpartisan official tasked with carrying out the public good or investigating executive branch malfeasance cannot do her job if the president can dismiss her at will for any reason under the sun, or for no reason at all. Imagine a member of a regulatory body fired because she might threaten the interests of a favored donor, or an inspector general pushed out because he uncovered wrongdoing. Proponents of the unitary executive theory call it necessary for presidential accountability. This is backwards. The theory works instead to shield the president from legislative scrutiny, to render him unaccountable except for a single quadrennial election. This runs against the structure of the Constitution, which imagines not separation of powers, but separated institutions sharing powers. The idea that Congress cannot insulate officials from direct presidential control would shock those members of Congress, among them delegates to the Constitutional Convention, who voted to do exactly that in the 1790s, when the ink had barely dried on the Constitution. Or perhaps they were mistaken, and it is Roberts who understands the true scope of presidential power. Whether or not the unitary executive theory is historically or intellectually grounded, it is undoubtedly true in the hands of a president such as Trump. Greater executive power is less a means to make the government more accountable than it is license for presidential dictatorship. It puts something like sovereign power in the hands of one man to use as he sees fit, with few opportunities for real accountability until the next election. Think Bonapartism with an American twist. There is something ironic at work in this effort to concentrate executive power in the name of constitutional fidelity. It is being done on behalf of a president who is mostly missing from the business of government. The unitary executive lacks an executive, and the president we have isn't unitary. He has given his newfound power away to a small set of virtually unaccountable advisors, insulated from public outcry and indifferent to public opinion. The White House is a lost cause, but one might hope that the Supreme Court would be attentive enough to the conditions of the real world to think twice about continued pursuit of its ideological project. But these are principled conservatives. They believe in their theories, and they intend to see them through no matter the cost to the Constitution or damage done to the American democracy. The next headline comes under the opinion banner and reads, "To win the Senate, Democrats should embrace big oil," by Matthew Iglesias, a contributed opinion writer and author of 1 Billion Americans, The Case for Thinking Bigger. To check President Trump's growing grip on the judiciary in the upcoming midterms or to advance a legislative agenda in 2029, Democrats need to answer a very difficult question. How can the party keep winning in states like North Carolina, become competitive again in Ohio, and expand the electoral map to include Texas or even Alaska and Kansas? Almost any viable path to a Senate majority runs through these states. They happen to be the ones, along with Iowa and Florida, where Kamala Harris came closest to winning in 2024, that currently have all Republican Senate delegations. There are some promising ideas, but they are somewhat abstract: abundance, populism, affordability, and the battle against oligarchy. There is a specific issue that could both boost Democrats in those key states and fit within those frameworks, a position that the party embraced in the relatively recent past. Liberals should support America's oil and gas industry. This won't be popular with everyone on the left, but President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, Prime Minister Mark Carney in Canada, and the Labour parties of Norway and Australia have done it. It's not just about votes, it's also a realistic path toward a cleaner environment. Start with politics. It wasn't that long ago, in 2012, for Barack Obama's re-election, that the Democratic Party's national platform argued that we can move towards a sustainable, energy, independent future if we harness all of America's great natural resources. Since then, the party has pivoted toward hostility to oil and gas. In a 2020 debate with Mr. Trump, Joe Biden vowed to focus on a green economy and transition from the oil industry, and sought to halt new oil and gas leasing early in his term, though ultimately the industry, after defeating the leasing pause in court, thrived. The animus is often invisible to participants in factional arguments because so many of them are based in coastal metropolises, but lack major natural resource industries. But from the standpoint of formerly blue or purple states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, or a place like Texas, where Democrats were once optimistic that a growing Hispanic population would deliver them a vast trove of voters, the change is notable. Mr. Obama's approach, which he characterized in speeches and campaign videos as an all-of-the-above energy policy, succeeded in delivering a solid re-election win against a backdrop of falling American greenhouse gas emissions and stricter standards for clean air and clean water. It also succeeded at its stated goal of advancing American energy independence. Thanks to Obama-era policies, including a historic deal that re-legalized crude oil exports while increasing investments in clean electricity, the United States is now a significant net exporter of oil as well as natural gas. The benefits of this to the American economy are large. Natural resource extraction offers good-paying blue-collar jobs. It also generates useful tax revenue. In more abstract terms, it improves the country's terms of trade when foreigners are buying oil from us rather than us from them. It reduces the cost of our imports of foreign-made food, clothing, and other products, driving down the cost of living for everyone. The national security benefits are also clear. As long as the world is using oil, and it absolutely still is, it is much better for it to be American oil rather than oil from Russia, Iran, Venezuela, or Saudi Arabia. There's a strong environmental case for Democrats taking America's natural resource wealth seriously as an asset. Center-left parties in other major energy-producing countries do not position themselves as enemies of domestic production. They take the problems of climate change and other pollution issues seriously by investing in measures to reduce long-term domestic consumption of dirty energy and promote new technologies. But they acknowledge that oil and gas trade in global markets and individual nations cannot clean up the planet with unilateral supply-side measures. American oil production is less carbon intensive than oil production of its competitors in Russia, Iran, Iraq, and Venezuela. Supplying oil to global markets is a win-win for the economy and the global environment. To be clear, in any reconciliation with the left, the oil and gas industry will have to do its part, too, and accept climate science. Democrats should insist on best practices, regulate methane leaks, promote electrification of drilling operations, and support the greenhouse gas reporting program. But they should also work with other low-intensity producers and climate-conscious importing regions like Japan and the European Union to promote preferential treatment for cleaner oil. The mindset shift needed here is to acknowledge that while climate change is real and harmful, The utility of fossil fuels is not something the oil and gas industry tricked the public into. There is not currently any technologically viable substitute for oil as a fuel for airplanes and large ocean-going vessels on which global commerce depends. Electric trains work extremely well, but a majority of America's freight lines rely on diesel, and building the infrastructure to electrify them would require time and money. Electric cars are growing their market share in the United States and in other countries, but EVs are not yet price competitive when it comes to the kinds of large trucks that American consumers tend to prefer. Some of these issues are easier to solve than others, but a lodestar for people concerned about climate change should be solving the not yet solved problems that keep the world dependent on fossil fuels, not trying to strangle American oil production. The case for natural gas is even clearer. It is much cleaner than coal, consumption of which is still high and rising globally. Increased gas production by displacing coal has been the single largest driver of American emissions reductions over time. To the extent that foreign countries can be persuaded to rely on American gas exports rather than coal to fill the gaps by the ongoing build-out of intermittent wind and solar, that's a climate win. Gas and renewables are closer friends than rivals when it comes to electricity generation. From a purely economic standpoint, the value of gas is that, unlike wind or solar power, it is dispatchable on a moment's notice. The downside is that it has fuel costs. Renewables are precisely the reverse, delivering zero marginal cost electricity when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, but without the ability to generate electrons on demand. Because of these complementary properties, the cheapest way to add reliable electricity in places where natural gas is abundantly available is with a mix of gas and renewables. Adding cheap electricity is an environmental imperative. Electric cars and heat pumps are much cleaner than conventional alternatives, even if the electricity is generated largely by burning natural gas. Insisting on a majority of renewable electricity raises costs dramatically, slows the pace of electrification, and ultimately leaves us further from a low-carbon future. Renewable boosters are optimistic that improvements in batteries and technologies to improve demand flexibility will ultimately overcome the cost barriers to 100% renewable grids. Others believe strongly that the alternative zero-emission forms of energies, like advanced geothermal or a new generation of small modular reactors, will be the solution. These are all promising ideas that are worthy of public sector support. But until that happens, responsible environmental policy is inseparable from sustainable political strategy. Tackling these big, difficult problems requires visionary investments in research and infrastructure, and that in turn requires people who care about climate change to be in positions of political power. To achieve that, Democrats must acknowledge that many voters do not want to bear short-term economic pain to address long-term climate issues. A realistic look at the Senate map makes it clear that Democrats' hopes hinge on states that have important fossil fuel industries. A Democratic Party that is open to responsible stewardship of those states' natural resources can win majorities and invest in solutions for tomorrow. Just as Democratic governors in energy-producing states like New Mexico and Colorado have used oil and gas revenue to finance a goal of universal child care and historic upgrades to conservation and recreation on public lands. The current view from the environmental movement, as expressed by the climate activist and author Genevieve Gunther, is that Democrats should ignore these practicalities because reducing emissions by some marginal amount while locking in fossil fuel development prevents us from drawing emissions down to net zero. In this approach to making policy, one starts with an end goal, 2 degrees of warming, global net zero by 2050, and asks whether some specific new project is consistent with that goal or not. Since this would require a very rapid phase-out of fossil fuels in rich countries, no new fossil fuel infrastructure is permissible, even when the infrastructure would, like new pipelines in the northeastern United States or new liquefied natural gas export terminals, likely make emissions lower by promoting more rapid electrification. This mentality explains why green groups continually find themselves opposing bipartisan congressional negotiations to enact permitting reform legislation that would make it easier to build both renewable and fossil fuel infrastructure. Anything that doesn't get us to global net zero is unacceptable, even if it does reduce emissions. This approach makes the perfect the enemy of the good, makes it impossible for Democrats to fulfill their pledges around affordability, and stands no chance of securing the congressional majorities that are needed to fund investments in tackling the hard problems of decarbonization. Taking climate seriously means adopting politically and economically sustainable approaches to energy economics, and that means a reconciliation with all forms of American energy. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next headline in the opinion section reads, "America is a Nation of Ideals, Not Bloodline," by Vivek Ramaswamy, a Republican candidate for president in 2024 who is running for governor of Ohio in 2026. Two competing visions are now emerging on the American right, and they are incompatible. One vision of American identity is based on lineage, blood, and soil. Inherited attributes matter most. The purest form of American, so-called heritage American, one whose ancestry traces to the founding of the United States or earlier. This view is now popularized by the Groyper right, a rapidly ascendant online movement that argues for the creation of a white-centric identity. This is a predictable response, one that I anticipated in my 2022 book, Nation of Victims, to anti-white discrimination over the last half-decade, and it is no longer just a fringe viewpoint. The alternative, and in my view correct, vision of American identity is based on ideals. Americanness isn't a scalar quality that varies based on your ancestry. It's binary. Either you're an American or you're not. You are an American if you believe in the rule of law, in freedom of conscience and freedom of expression, in colorblind meritocracy, in the U.S. Constitution, in the American dream, and if you are a citizen who swears exclusive allegiance to our nation. As Ronald Reagan quipped, you can go to live in France, but you can't become a Frenchman. But anyone from any corner of the world can come to live in the United States and become an American. No matter your ancestry, if you wait your turn and obtain citizenship, you are every bit as American as a Mayflower descendant, as long as you subscribe to the creed of the American founding and the culture that was born of it. This is what makes American exceptionalism possible. The divide between these two views is more foundational than policy divides between Republicans and Democrats. Older Republicans who may doubt the rising prevalence of the blood and soil view should think again. My social media feeds are littered with hundreds of slurs, most from accounts that I don't recognize, about Pajeets and street shitters, and calls to deport me back to India. I was born and raised in Cincinnati and have never resided outside the United States. Anti-Semitic statements are now normalized online, and it's not limited to the internet either. Rob Dreher, a conservative writer, recently described a trip to Washington, D.C., where he estimated that a sizable minority of Republican Gen Z staffers are fans of Nick Fuentes. This new online right movement doesn't represent the views of most real-world Republican voters. Take it from a son of an Indian immigrant who dominates polling in Ohio's Republican primary for governor. But as one of the most vocal opponents of left-wing identity politics, I now see real reluctance from my former anti-woke peers to criticize the new identity politics on the right. This pattern eerily mirrors the hesitance of prominent Democrats to criticize woke excess in the run-up to the 2024 presidential election, even though most Democratic voters clearly never believe that math is racist or that hard work and the written tradition are hallmark of whiteness. That's a big part of why Kamala Harris lost in such spectacular fashion. If the post-Trump GOP makes the same mistake with our own identitarian fringe, we will meet a similar fate. Young people are often a leading indicator of where political winds are blowing, and the generational nature of the problem is remarkable. Many voters under 30 believe they will never be able to afford a home. They're often saddled with college debt, and absent dramatic policy interventions, Social Security will most likely be curtailed before they ever receive benefits. They are understandably bitter about it. Their rising sense of economic insecurity conspires with a pent-up psychosocial angst. Depression and anxiety are more prevalent among members of Gen Z than in prior American generations. In the absence of a shared national identity, they're turning to tribalism and victimhood instead. Groyperism on the right, Zoran Mamdani-infused socialism on the left. So what's the solution? We need to imagine a new American dream that delivers economic empowerment while also filling the next generation's hunger for purpose and belonging. To achieve that vision, 4 conditions must be met. First, conservative leaders should condemn, without hedging, Groyper transgressions. If, like Mr. Fuentes, you believe that Hitler was really effing cool, or if you publicly call Usha Vance a Jeet, then you have no place in the conservative movement, period. The point isn't to clutch pearls, but to prevent the gradual legitimization of this un-American animus. This online edgelording reminds me of toddlers testing their parents' limits. The job of a real Republican leader is to set firm boundaries for young followers, as a good father does for a transgressive son. That doesn't mean censorship. It means moral clarity instead of indulgence. On policy debates, the Overton window should remain broad. It should be acceptable on the right to criticize U.S. aid to Israel or immigrant visas, but it is downright unacceptable to spew poison toward Jews, Indians, or any other ethnic group. We must practice what we preach. My current Democratic opponent in Ohio is a Jewish woman, and while I criticize her policy record unsparingly, I will be her most vocal defender against anti-Semitic attacks from left or right. Second, reduce costs of living. States can deliver quick wins. Drive down home prices by eliminating local land use restrictions to increase housing supply. Reduce property tax burdens by making bloated local government more efficient. Reduce electric bills by speeding up permitting timelines for new power plants and natural gas extraction. Democrats gave a mixed reception to Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's case for abundance. But if they shed the left-coded delivery of their ideas, a future GOP could easily welcome many of them. Third, create a broad-based participation in wealth generation from stock market gains. In the AI era, it's conceivable to envision a future with stock market outperformance, even in the face of stagnating wages and job losses. There is a formula for social unrest. That is a formula for social unrest, and shared equity offers a practical solution. If every child legally born in the United States receives an American dream birthright in the form of $10,000 invested in the S&P 500, every young American would become a millionaire by age 60, assuming a modest 8% annual return, which falls below historical 5, 10, 20, and 40-year averages. That's the mathematical magic of compounding. The effect would be profound. Instead of lambasting millionaires, they would be on the way to becoming millionaires. Young Americans on the left and right alike would have shared skin in the game to root together for maximum economic growth, a chance to play on the same team again while weaning themselves off the federal welfare state. The recently enacted Trump accounts are an early positive step in this direction. If the program expands, it could gradually replace certain other federal entitlements instead of simply adding to them. Fourth, provide America the shared national project we badly need. America has a greater purpose in the world than what we have embodied thus far in the 21st century. Americans of all stripes long to be reminded of it through a modern-day equivalent of the Apollo mission. Perhaps it's establishing a base on the moon to achieve nuclear fusion in a way that powers the creation of artificial intelligence without negative externalities and constraints on Earth. Perhaps it's something else of similar scale and ambition. Such a project could serve as a much-needed catalyst to revive high-quality math and science education in the United States. By elevating standards in public schools, expanding educational choice, and much more. The uplifting truth is that the solution to identity politics needn't be one camp defeating the other, but instead achieving together a national escape velocity to more promising terrain. Back to a headline under the columns and commentary banner. It reads, Rubio is winning the Trump era by Ross Douthat. You are watching the 2016 Republican primary campaign, trying to figure out if Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio can stop Donald Trump from winning the Republican nomination. A man from the future steps out of a shimmering portal and informs you that the winner of the primary campaign will go on to be the Republican president who will finally bomb Iran's nuclear program. You say, maybe Ted Cruz. The president will ship armaments to support Ukraine in a brutal war against Vladimir Putin's Russia. Okay, you say, then we can probably scratch Trump off the list. And finally, your visitor informs you this president will put in place a naval blockade of socialist Venezuela, aiming at a Latin American realignment that might undermine Venezuela's ally Cuba as well. You immediately log on to a novel website called A Prediction Market and bet your entire savings on Marco Rubio. The presidency in 2026 belongs to Trump, and the language of his administration sounds nothing like the idealistic neoconservatism that defined Rubio's political brand a decade ago. Depending on the document or day of the week, Trumpism can sound like Nixonian realism, pre-World War II isolationism, or just a swaggering mercantile imperialism. But look at what the administration is actually doing, not just how it talks, and the hawkish foreign policy that you might have once expected from a President Rubio is palpably present in the policies of Trump's second term. There's a continuing quest for peace with Russia, yes, but almost a year after Trump promised an immediate deal, the war continues with American military support. There's more daylight between the United States and Israel than vintage neoconservatism would favor, but the military action long desired by Middle East hawks was delivered by Trump. And while the justifications for attempting regime change in Venezuela have ping-ponged around, drugs, oil, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, we're clearly engaged in the kind of old-fashioned anti-communist action that you'd expect from with the son of Miami as the Secretary of State. In exerting this apparent influence, Rubio has somehow avoided becoming either a media fixation or a major player in the right's unfolding psychodrama. He has accumulated formal power, adding the National Security Advisor's portfolio in a Kissingerian consolidation, without accumulating many open enemies. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, December 21st, 2025 issue of the New York Times Opinion section. We read from the New York Times Reviews section every Sunday at 2 p.m. Your reader has been David Frothingham. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, followed at 4 by a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Please stay for these readings and more throughout the day, and feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, with any questions you may have. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,